Hello, Greg here. Just want to do a solo recording on this early Wednesday evening here. Just going to take a little bit of time, not sure how long, but something I wanted to discuss that I've been thinking about for several days, and I'm now getting an opportunity to record about it. And that is something that happened several days ago, and I think that what I'm going to talk about here, I think it's very illustrative of a trend that is going on right now within the Trump administration, Trump's America, the Trump presidency, particularly within the conservative wing, quote unquote, the media pundits, activists, and the way that they, I believe, manipulate and weaponize information to fit the current narrative that Donald Trump is the persecuted president and that the deep state is all his Democrat left opponents and they're all out trying to destroy him. Anyway, I'm going to read excerpts from a segment of the Rush Limbaugh show from Friday, February 21st, where Limbaugh, this is gold, claimed that Bush was tricked by the deep state, the Democratic Party, into the Iraq war with false information about weapons of mass destruction, and that this same Democratic deep state is trying to destroy Trump with fake stories of Russian collusion. And I'm going to read from this. I'm going to provide commentary at various points. And then when I'm finished reading this, I'm going to really give some thoughts about this, what I see going on here. And obviously, as people who have followed Rush Limbaugh for a long time and remember the Bush administration, remember how big of a propagandist he was for the Iraq war and active Bush administration, illegal criminal activities. People will see just how problematic this is, that this is coming from Limbaugh. But anyway, I'm going to get into this and I'm going to start reading from this. This is from the February 21st edition of the Rush Limbaugh show. This is now I'm reading from Limbaugh here. Quote, "Let's go back to the Iraq war, 2003. George W. Bush spends a year and a half traveling the country, preparing everybody, lobbying the American people to support it. He goes to the United Nations, has satellite photos, all kinds of stuff. Colin Powell was up there showing the photos, supposedly, of weapons of mass destruction installations in Iraq of Saddam Hussein. And the Europeans, our allies in the intelligence community, all support this." Moving on now to the next paragraph. Now, Bush, as a Republican, was probably not popular with the deep state, particularly after how he was elected. You know, there was outrage with the Florida recount in 2000. A lot of Democrats, a lot of deep staters think that Gore should have been president. He won the popular vote. They think the Supreme Court unfairly put Bush in there. I think there was as much resentment in the deep state. We just didn't call it that then for George W. Bush as there is today for Donald Trump. And if not the same, it's close. End quote. All right, now I got to give a couple comments here. You know, yeah, there was a lot of outrage with the Florida recount. And a lot of, quote, deep staters think that Gore should have been president. Well, I mean, there were some shenanigans that went on, and I don't believe that the 2000 election was an actual legal, fair victory for George W. Bush. And I think a lot of people have a right to be outraged about that. But here Limbaugh is equating outrage to simply, bitter liberal Democrats in the deep state class. And by the way, he says that we didn't call it the deep state back then. Well, there are clips somewhere online. There are clips of Rush Limbaugh back in the 90s mocking and ridiculing people who talked about the New World Order, which was kind of a big deal in the 90s. The idea of the New World Order and the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Group. And Limbaugh would mock and ridicule those people. So now he's using the term deep state, and he has been for a few years. So that's interesting. Anyway, back into the article. Quote, "I think, how could so many different intelligence agencies get something so wrong as weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? And remember, they gave Bush mounds of satellite photo evidence, documentation evidence. Colin Powell was dispatched to the United Nations to present this evidence. And it was all bogus because we went in there. It was the pretext for invading Iraq after 9/11. We get in there, and there are no weapons of mass destruction. It was one of the most embarrassing things. The Bush administration had to scramble. Everybody had to scramble. What I have seen this bunch of people in the intelligence community be capable of, what they've tried with Trump here, this whole Russia meddling, Trump colluding, this whole thing is a gigantic lie, a totally bogus hoax, a silent coup. That's when I began to think the weapons of mass destruction thing was a setup against Bush, too. Oh boy. My point is this: why should we believe these people? They haven't been right about anything in the last 4 years. They were wrong about weapons of mass destruction. They didn't get Benghazi right. Why should we believe them? We shouldn't. It is a continuation of an insane mindset that the deep state and the Democratic Party are in because they can't find a way to defeat this guy. They're almost insane with their inability to land a punch on Donald Trump. End quote. Okay, so there's a lot to take in here. I mean, Rush is now claiming that the Bush administration was lied to and deceived about weapons of mass destruction. It's kind of interesting that he's come to this, basically had this come to Jesus moment now in February of 2020 when I just found clips from 4 years ago in February of 2016. I guess this was back when, back before Rush and a lot of the other establishment Republicans unanimously put their support behind Trump in the lead up to the 2016 general election. There's a clip of Limbaugh in February of 2016 saying that Trump sounded like the Democrats. And he was at the, I believe it was a Republican debate, the debate in South Carolina, where Trump effectively destroyed the Bush political dynasty. Part of his ongoing process of that, by basically criticizing Jeb Bush and chastising Jeb Bush for his brother's support of the Iraq War based on lies. And of course, Trump, I don't believe he's ever had genuine opposition to the Iraq War. He's been quoted as saying we should have gone in and grabbed their oil and left. I mean, that's not exactly opposition, if you ask me. But it was only a few years ago that Limbaugh was comparing Trump to liberals in his comments about the Iraq War. And I mean, that's pretty, I mean, yeah, it's a pretty convenient come to Jesus moment for Rush Limbaugh to say this. Another thing doing that I'm going to address after I'm finished with this is the partisanship coming out here. Oh, it's the Democrats are trying to destroy Trump with this because they can't defeat him, just like the Democrats couldn't actually defeat Bush on any type of real policies or whatnot, so they had to trick him into a war that would destroy his presidency. I mean, that's basically what he's saying here. I'm going to get into that here a little later, after I'm finished reading from this article here. Anyway, I'm going to continue with the article now. Quote, they don't understand it. They have deployed every weapon they have to destroy political opponents, and it's worked almost every time they've tried it on whoever they wanted to damage or get rid of, but they can't even land a glancing blow on Trump. So now, after the Mueller report says there was no collusion, what are we back to? Trump is a Russian agent. The Russians want Trump to get reelected. We just had a 4-year quasi-phony investigation when there was no evidence. The only thing was a fake dossier. There were lies to the FISA court to get warrants to spy on Trump. They couldn't even make up any evidence that would stick. And yet, here we are. We're going to recycle this whole thing. That Trump is the chosen one of Vladimir Putin. And there's nothing we can do to stop it, by the way. The Democrats can't stop it. Despite knowing who is behind meddling in our elections, the Democrats can't find a way to stop it. Trump's going to win, so we have to tame it. The Russians are meddling in our elections. These people are doing more damage to the integrity and the honor of the American election system than Vladimir Putin would ever dream of being successful at. And they're making themselves look like abject fools in the process. So right on time, here comes the New York Times publishing their piece. And I'm going to tell you what, folks. Remember yesterday how the drive-by media was just absorbed with the Roger Stone sentence? The Roger Stone sentence, something so irrelevant and untied to anything serious, and yet they're glued to it. They have the reporters and the reporterettes and their info babes outside. This is Limbaugh's terminology, by the way. Outside and inside the courtroom when the sentence is announced. They're hoping for 7 to 9 years. It comes back 3 years and 4 months. They're devastated. They're disappointed. But I'm telling you, they covered that Stone sentencing so closely because they think it gives them a chance to prove Trump is guilty of colluding with the Russians. Even though Stone was not charged with anything to do with colluding with the Russians, they still think the Stone sentence gave them an opportunity to make this case. End quote. Rush, if they so really wanted to bring Trump down at all costs, man, I mean, number one, you would have had, the media would stop ignoring a lot of the more damning information that's out there about Trump's background and some of his alleged crimes and criminal acts that go far beyond just derogatory tapes made on made on a Access Hollywood recording back in 2005, and actually dig into allegations of Trump doing things much darker than that. I mean, Katie Johnson comes to light, the Katie Johnson allegations, and then even his actual history as what appears to be a long-term agent, if not outright agent of Russian intelligence via organized crime interest going back to at least 1987 when Trump visited Moscow for the first time, and that in addition to the fact that his properties have been used as money laundering, money washing fronts for organized crime syndicates, primarily out of the former Soviet Union, for decades now. So, instead of that, we got a sham investigation with Robert Mueller, who was most likely, in my view, was actually playing the role of somebody who would limit the investigation and would find Trump not guilty. And then this sham impeachment proceeding all over a phone call and quid pro quo and crap like that, where all the Republican swamp dwellers all voted to acquit Trump. So, I mean, yeah, give me a break with this. They were so out to get him. At this point, the media is actively serving as Trump's biggest allies in his reelection bid. So, anyway, I'm going to get back into the article here. Quote, I believe that they all knew this New York Times story was coming because that news is from last week when the House Democrats Intelligence Committee were told about the Russians hoping that Trump gets elected, working to make it happen. That's old news. It's from last week. They held it for the day after the Stone sentence. They don't realize how transparent they are. Anyway, folks, I hope you're taking time to savor this rather than get mad at. I hope you're taking time to just enjoy this because you are watching the literal implosion of the self-commission and the self-commission to insanity of a major political party in this country, the Democrats. End quote. And that is the end of the excerpt. And I'm reading this from Media Matters. I know it's Media Matters, but hey, you know what? The truth is the truth, and they're not making up quotes here. So this is what Rush Limbaugh said on his program. I'm just reading the transcript. So a lot of thoughts here. I mean, I expressed a couple of them already. I mean, Rush Limbaugh is basically rewriting his history now and the history of the Bush administration to fit this very convenient narrative that very convenient, what I called earlier, come to Jesus moment that Limbaugh's had just in the last few years, that the Iraq war was a big lie based on lies about weapons of mass destruction, and that, of course, we put the spin on, as I talked about, that the Democrats and the deep state, which is basically the Democratic Party and their allies, tricked Bush into launching the war based on fake WMDs. And I mean, and I mentioned how I found a clip from February 2016 of Limbaugh chastising Trump for using those arguments in a debate, I believe. I believe it was a South Carolina debate with Jeb Bush. So I can provide a link to Limbaugh talking about that in the show description for this when I put this up. So, I mean, this is pretty amazing. I mean, Limbaugh was one of the worst, the biggest of the Bush era propagandists. I would say that his selling of everything the Bush administration did post 9/11, whether it was the Iraq War, whether it was things like Guantanamo Bay, which he called Club Gitmo, making fun of the idea that there was actually torture or things that were illegal going on there, and also his ridiculing and dismissal of the Abu Ghraib scandal in Iraq, which he called a fraternity prank. So, I mean, he was really bad. And I mean, as far as middle conservative America goes, I mean, Rush Limbaugh, his radio empire, I would argue probably had more influence over than pretty much anyone else when it came to selling conservative Republican Americans on the idea of the justification for the Iraq War, which of course is based on the big lie of September 11th and all the things that followed from there. And Rush still now, I mean, even in the age of the internet and the new media and the rise of all this new very popular conservative figures, I'd still say Rush Limbaugh is probably, when it comes to just regular middle American conservatives, Rush Limbaugh is still the king of talk radio. He still reaches countless numbers of people every day with his radio message, people who trust him and rely on him to tell them the truth. I would argue Limbaugh and also Sean Hannity has a tremendous influence with the rank and file Republicans who are not really internet savvy, who aren't really versed on some of the more conspiratorial rhetoric that might come out of other new media websites and new media outlets that have risen in the age of the rise of the internet and social media in the Trump era. But I mean, even here you see Limbaugh using the word deep state and talking about the deep state and how the elites and Trump is fighting the elites. So you've got that language even really thrown into the Rush Limbaugh show, as opposed, not to mention the other more, might say, conspiratorial elements and facets of the conservative right-wing media. So, I mean, and here's the thing about Limbaugh, this come to Jesus moment on Iraq War and WMDs. I mean, it's amazing because, I mean, even if he genuinely believes now that we were lied to about it, I mean, he's completely rewriting the history, because there's no way you can look at this from an objective perspective and say Bush was tricked by Democrats. No, the biggest propaganda that came out of in the lead up to the Iraq War was coming from inside the administration. People like Vice President Cheney and advisors around him, people like Scooter Libby and Paul Wolfowitz, and then the Office of Special Plans, Douglas Feith, David Wormser, people like that. They were the ones cooking up the false intelligence. And they were the ones who were convincing Bush to go to war. Yes, the Democrats were complicit. The Democrats did not do anything to stop the war. Many of the most prominent Democrats, like Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, who is now, of course, running for president, voted for the Iraq War. And so they're complicit and they did nothing to stop it. And so, yeah, there's definitely complicity there. But to say that Democrats tricked Bush, I mean, that is just such a unbelievable rewriting of history. Actually, it is believable considering the source. You know, it's very clear that cancer has not changed Rush Limbaugh for the better. I mean, but I mean, just what a twisting of history and a rewriting of history to match this current narrative that is in place. And this is what I want to get at here. The biggest message I really want to get at here is just the conveniency of this message and how Rush Limbaugh is an example of, there are a number of these people right now operating within the conservative media that are pushing varying versions of the same bigger overall propaganda message. Basically that, you know, Donald Trump is our guy, he's our president, he's heroic, he's the guy who's fighting the enemy and we have to support him, and he's done nothing impeachable and no one around him has done anything criminal, and everything about it is everyone's just out to get him. And there are a few people that I'm seeing pushing this narrative, or they're pushing different variations of it, but it's a bigger overall narrative to just basically protect and run cover for Donald Trump. And what I believe, what Jeremy Roth-Kushel and I think have laid out very effectively, I believe, on our programs, and other people such as Seth Abramson, for example, have laid out very clearly, and I believe very effectively, the true nature of the operation that got Donald Trump elected in 2016, as well as his background and his history, which I think explain a lot about what we're seeing under Donald Trump. But the bigger goal in place is to run cover for Donald Trump. And you see in one variation of this is Limbaugh now bringing in completely rewriting history on Bush era propaganda that he was at the forefront of pushing in the media to match his narrative that Donald Trump's the victim of the deep state. Although I will say one positive thing that might come out of this is that, hey, Rush Limbaugh admits that the Iraq War was a big lie. Maybe we should, that's quite an admission. I think people should at least take that part at face value, minus the propaganda of it. That's a pretty big revelation from Rush Limbaugh. So I think people really need to take that and run with it, but I don't know if they will. But Rush Limbaugh is one example of this, I guess you'd call it a type of grift that is going on within the conservative movement, all done to protect Trump with varying narratives that are in place. Another person who I would mention is Tucker Carlson, the Fox News host, of course, who many people in the right see as this populist voice in the Trump administration, even compared to other media pundits, because Tucker sometimes will talk more about things like, the effects of immigration, the effects of losing American jobs, and and even catering somewhat dog whistling to the alt-right with some of his messages about culture and immigration and multiculturalism, changing the face of America and standing as the voice in opposition to this. And course, I mean, Tucker's got quite the background going back to the Weekly Standard with Bill Kristol, his MSNBC program where he, on numerous occasions, mocked and ridiculed people who questioned the attacks of September 11th. Just 8 years, just back in 2012, 8 or 9 years ago, saying that Iran deserves to be annihilated, and quote unquote. And now Tucker Carlson has rebranded himself as the populist, kind of the almost like borderline pro-Russia populist of the Trump administration. But it's all under this bigger overall narrative that Trump is the guy and that everyone's lying about him and people are just trying to destroy him because he's doing such great things for the country. And anytime he does do bad things, like when he pushes hawkish rhetoric against Iran or he goes and assassinates Soleimani, oh, it's not Trump that's doing it. It's the bad people around him that are forcing his hand and manipulating him to do these things. Lee Stranahan takes the same line on Radio Sputnik, as we've talked about in the most recent recordings that Jeremy and I did, shows where we discussed our phone calls into fault lines. There's another example, and then I'll share one more example here. Is Ann Coulter, another person who was really key to the Bush era war on terror propaganda. I mean, Ann Coulter basically, all the way from post 9/11 op-ed article where she wrote, "Let's invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity," and just any time she constantly was taking shots at just how un-American and how unpatriotic the left liberals are for not being supportive enough of the war on terror. And I mean, a lot of that's just BS, where they're just talking about people who were supporting the war efforts and were actually doing nothing to stop the war efforts, as being the epitomization of, anti-war radicals. I mean, Limbaugh did that all the time with even generic Democrat senators like John Kerry or Dick Durbin or Barbara Boxer were apologists for terrorism. I mean, it's just so stupid. It's so amateur. But Ann Coulter now has become, she's another populist voice, although I guess she's lost some support within the pro-Trump circles because of her criticism of Trump. But of course, I mean, her criticism simply amounts to, well, Trump hasn't built the wall yet. He's not keeping all of his promises. And she's basically coming at it as like this firebrand who's criticizing Trump because he's not doing enough to keep his promises. But meanwhile, I mean, Ann Coulter still keeps the same narrative in place that, the liberal crazies are trying to destroy the president. And so, I mean, that's the bigger narrative. And you see these, what I would call grifters. I mean, people who, I will argue, they're still serving the same bigger agenda that they were serving during the Bush administration. I mean, none of these people have done anything to expose the lies of the war on terror, which of course Donald Trump has perpetuated, and I believe represents the idea of the war on terror more than anyone else, any other president for sure. I mean, including Bush. I mean, at its basic, at its foundation, the actual meaning of the war on terror. And none of these people have done anything to stop that. I mean, even Tucker in his milquetoast criticism of Trump's policies in Syria and Iran really is not going that far, especially when he just basically continues to give Trump agency to deny any agency or responsibility for Trump in this, and shouldering the blame onto other people. So you're seeing these long-term agents, operatives, propagandists within the media who have for years been pushing a lot of the biggest lies, and now in some cases, I mean, in the case of Tucker Carlson, you have this rebranding. Ann Coulter still, I guess, talks the same as she used to. Now she's just using her rhetoric to criticize Trump when she was one of the major figures who helped get Trump elected, with her, very much using her platform to shill for Trump at all costs. And then you've got Rush Limbaugh, who's now rewriting his own history and the history of the Bush administration to fit the narrative that Trump is being persecuted. And who does this benefit? I mean, who is Rush Limbaugh benefiting when he does this? I mean, I think he's benefiting the same people that were benefiting from the partisanship of the Clinton era, when Limbaugh was the big radio firebrand partisan voice that was supposed to be against the Clintons, but was actually really doing nothing to actually expose the Clintons and their criminality. Or during the Bush era, when Rush was the biggest, I would say, within conservative media, purveyor of the lies of the post 9/11, and then of course the Obama administration more the same usual partisanship and with some dog whistling against Obama and his administration, and now with Trump where he's pushing the idea of where he's a primary pusher of the heroic Trump fighting the evil elite Democratic deep state. So I say Rush Limbaugh is still serving the same purposes that he served during previous administrations. That is the goals of this obvious, very Likudnik, neoconservative element, both here in the U.S. and also in Israel, that obviously benefited from September 11th, benefited from the war in Iraq, benefited from the global war on terror in general, and are now benefiting under Trump, who has done so many things for Israel that no other president in history would do, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights as belonging to Israel, signing this executive order on anti-Semitism on college campuses, and then also given the green light to unlimited settlement. These are things that other presidents wouldn't sign off on. And, Trump's doing that. He is the Zionist Israeli dream. And also, I would say Limbaugh is continuing to serve the purposes of this bigger, quote, conservative movement through the Council for National Policy, which Limbaugh, I believe, has long been affiliated with, maybe directly at times, and certainly indirectly via a larger network of conservative activists that have been on the scene for a long time. I mean, same goes for Ann Coulter, and same goes for Tucker Carlson as well. But I mean, it's this, John Brisson, my friend John Brisson. We've read the documents, has documented so thoroughly the Council for National Policy and how it just brings all of these various movements within the bigger conservative Republican apparatus together. And Limbaugh, I think, is simultaneously serving there's a lot of tie-ins with the whole dominionist evangelical sector and the Israeli Zionists, as they see like the pushing for Israel and Judeo-Christian values as a major part of their crusade, of their worldview vision. And of course, things like Rush Limbaugh weaponizing the term feminazi and some of the talking points as far as the social wars go, culture wars go, has really contributed to those efforts, just painting anybody who is opposed to any type of right-wing culture war rhetoric or policy as just being unhinged, loony leftists. He still does that to this day. He's been doing that for 30 years now. And also, obviously, Council for National Policy, who I believe the bigwigs at the very top, who did approve of the Bush presidency and were very approving of the war on terror and continue to be, and ultimately rallied around Trump, even if they did not initially support him, as the initial support was more with Ted Cruz, I believe, but did rally around Trump rather unanimously in the lead up to the 2016 election and have stayed by his side ever since. And ultimately, a primary goal at the very top of this whole Council for National Policy conservative right-wing leadership is this desire to keep alive this two-party political system, keep us within the Republicans and the Democrats. Don't look for outside solutions. I mean, John Brisson was playing what he calls America's grandmother, Phyllis Schlafly, saying that, she doesn't support third parties. It's Republican or Democrat, and we don't have any other real options, so we need to support one of the two parties. I mean, when you look at the way Limbaugh weaponizes his rhetoric, it's all about the leftists. It's all about the liberals. It's all about right versus left. I mean, you can see right there, Limbaugh wants to keep his listenership. And again, Limbaugh is talking to the actual meat and potatoes, conservative base with his radio show, with his narratives he pushes out. And obviously, very much one of the major goals is to keep people in this left-right paradigm, which is a primary goal of both people within the Republican establishment and the Democratic establishment. And now Limbaugh is using simply the narrative has changed a little bit because the president is now Trump. It's no longer Bush or Obama or Clinton, but he's serving the same role as a partisan hack operative in the way he words things and the way he just blames the other side for all of our problems. And so I wanted to take some time to read from that story and comment on it because it's amazing how Rush Limbaugh is just is changing history, and I'd say this is pretty brazen of him. This is pretty. Um, I mean, this is something else that he would come out with this talking point. It's amazing, just rewriting of history, the rewriting of the Bush administration, and using this rewritten, revised history on Bush to as a means to defend Trump. It's pretty amazing. And as I said, I'm not surprised. I mean, cancer has not changed the man for the better, but I'm still amazed that these narratives get out there, and I'm amazed by the brazenness of it. And anyhow, I hope hope people get something out of this, and I might be back soon with another audio recording. But Jeremy and I will definitely be having a show come out very soon, and I will be having a second. I will be uploading very soon our second show we did on detailing and summarizing some of our recent phone calls. So look forward to that. And until next time, I will talk to you soon. Thanks.